Díobh agus fáilte roimh go léir. You are all very welcome tonight. My name is Louise Cantillon and I am delighted to be here as your host. I'm a radio broadcaster and I also work with TG Cahir. So delighted to be here this evening and to be hosting such an incredible event, which is the launch of a new initiative by Narrative 4. Hashtag empathy is a game changer. You'll see it just above my head here, and you can feel free to use that hashtag right across social media all night tonight. So tonight, hashtag empathy is a game changer is going to be our buzz phrase and what we hope to discuss, promote, and hopefully have some really interesting discussions around. We aim to talk about empathy being a game changer and the need for radical empathy on the agenda to get us talking about how we can make our communities more compassionate places for people to live in and to begin to create solutions to issues that are rife in our society, and hopefully do it through empathy. We're all here tonight because we care, and we're all here tonight because we want to make empathy infectious. Our goal is to change the game, and tonight we will put this into context and get the first of many great discussions going around the topic of empathy. Hashtag empathy is a game changer, and a reminder again that that hashtag is there, and please feel free to share your opinions as the night goes on, or any questions you would like, you can pop them in the question box as our panel discussion begins. You can also tag at Narrative4 Ireland on Instagram or at Narrative4_IRL on Twitter. And we would love for you to partake in the discussion tonight, and of course to promote and to share everything that we are going to discuss. There has never been a more important time to nurture skills of empathy in all age groups, to ensure our schools, our colleges, our workplaces, and our communities are kinder and more inclusive places for everyone to live together in harmony. Narrative 4 believes that the world will benefit from people being more empathetic when we share stories and when we use the power of stories to break down division and to help understand difficulties and differences. The world seems to be in such turmoil at the moment, with hatred, it's rife, antisocial behaviour, reports of racist attacks online, the rise of online hate and other forms of discrimination that are major threats to our society and the communities we live in. We want to change the game, and we don't want to be onlookers, and we don't want to stand by. We feel that we can amplify the message of empathy, and we can create more compassionate, community-focused life in Ireland, where people will lead happier, more empathetic lives. Narrative 4 has been running a successful secondary school programme for the last number of years, where young people build empathy, listening skills, they nurture relationships across differences through exchanging their personal stories with one another. And Narrative 4 has already trained teachers in 35% of secondary schools across Ireland. But much deeper engagement is needed in order to propel the project, and the hope that we can engage parents, teachers, students, principals, media, activists, and anyone else who is willing to make a stance for this vital issue and to be more empathetic and promote and celebrate the message. I know that you are all here this evening, and many of you may have been already involved with some of Narrative 4 and maybe have trained as facilitators, or maybe you're interested in training as a facilitator, and that's why you've come tonight as well. So you're all most welcome. And I do want to remind you now that you can find out more about a summer series of training online at www.narrative4.ie. So you can head along and have a look at all courses and all groups that are available to join. And we will share all of those links as well after this chat in a follow-up email. So do keep an eye out for that. We hope and we can take some learnings from tonight, and that maybe you can take them and foster some of the messages tonight into your own work, and maybe apply them in a wider society within your work community and beyond. And I think that for me personally, and I'm sure the panelists will agree a little later, there has never been empathy needed in our world more than it is needed right now. So we're going to kick things off this evening, as I mentioned, with an esteemed panel of guests. I am honoured to be joined by these wonderful people who I know have all powerful stories to tell and incredible messages of empathy to share with us as well. So Let's do just that. I want to please welcome composer and musician with the frames, of Frames fame, I should say, Colm Mac Con Iomaire, an Gael Gorcho Maso, Ani Ascoil Tulin and Nocht, Colm agus Fáilte Olvor. Colm is also a founding board member of Narrative for Ireland, so he knows this project and message inside out. Colm, thank you so much for joining us. Social entrepreneur, activist, artist, and all-round epic human being, a founder of Gura Media, I should say. Mamobo Ogoro is also joining us tonight. Mamobo, an honor as well to have you in the lineup and to be joined by you tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time. And finally, comedian, theatre maker, and columnist for the Irish Times and the Irish Examiner, Martin Beanz Warde, is joining us as well. So and wrapping up an incredible lineup of guests. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation and discussion.
Thank you.
I know it's that awkward moment where you're all going to try and say thanks together, so we'll try. I know over Zoom it's a little less natural. I spoke to all of you a little earlier today about empathy and maybe a moment in your lives where you felt you learned the word empathy, or what the emotion, the action was. Martin, you wrote quite a profound piece in the Examiner this week, where you recount a story, traumatic experience you lived through as a young person, and you told me earlier on today that that was a moment in your head, and I loved the phrase you used where the empathy switch was flicked on. So you might just kick things off and tell us that story.
Well, yeah, I suppose the angle I was probably, because I was 13 when that happened. In actual fact, I was only a few months into my teenage years, and the loss of my cousin and the circumstances surrounding that loss, it was traumatic, obviously. You know, being 13 and taking your 11-year-old cousin out of the swimming pool and carrying her lifeless body out of the water, that stayed with me. But that's not where the empathy came from. The empathy came from in the middle of what I was going through, which by all accounts was some sort of a breakdown that went unrecognized until my adult years. But rather than me, I suppose, think about how I was feeling, it forced me to think about how the family, the immediate family, were feeling. And that's why I'd never really spoken about it publicly. And I had this conversation with my parents, you know, as to why I don't speak about it all that often. And it's based around the fact that it's not just my tragedy. And if the family of my cousin Philomena didn't speak about it openly and in public, I had no right. That's how I felt. So it was the first situation in my life where I was putting myself, I was 13, but I was putting myself into the position, the emotional position of another group of people. And when you're 13, you tend not to be too empathetic because, you know, you're ego driven, you're driven by hormones, by sugary sweets and drinks. You know, you tend not to have too much time for introspection. However, what we've learned in the last 10 to 20 years is that, you know, trauma surfaces in different ways, and it certainly triggers different parts of our mind, and we react differently. It may be that we become more hypervigilant to the micro expression changes in somebody's faces, or it could be, you know, in my case, being triggered by the smell of chlorine when I go to a swimming pool. But what I noticed from that is that I'm more in tune now, and even from then, with other people's pain and other people's anguish. And even if they have a smile on their face, and it's very difficult for me to describe this, but it's like when I look at somebody's eyes, I can see almost if there's something behind it. And it's usually if there's sadness or if there's trauma. And it forces me to ask the questions, and ask the questions in a way where I almost feel like I know the answer. And for me, that's what empathy is. It's not about feeling sympathy for what somebody goes through. It's about attaching myself to the pain that they might be going through. And I genuinely believe that the biggest, I suppose, examples of empathy and empathetic behavior comes from people who've experienced trauma or severe crisis in their life, because that's when the switch is flicked on. you're attaching yourself to something else, and it attaches itself to you. So you can recognize that in other people. And can it be changed, or can it be trained in somebody? Of course. Empathy is just about understanding the emotional approaches and experiences of the person that you may not know personally. And we can all do that, because we don't get through life without having at least one moment where we're sad, one moment where we feel vulnerable, afraid, or anxious. And it's about asking yourself, in those moments where you experience that, and if you're very lucky, you may have only experienced it once, but it's about asking yourself, when you were in that moment and you were going through that trauma or that sadness, what would you have liked to have been said to you or done for you from another stranger? And it's about passing that on. So it's about offering up what you would have liked to have been done to somebody else. That's what empathy is for me. It's about understanding that some other people may be going through some really, really tough stuff, and it's about just reaching out. And I know it's cliche at this stage saying that, a smile can change somebody's day, but it really, really can. It really can. And I think even more than that, a hug or a conversation. I don't mean like go hugging strangers. You might do that at a festival, but it doesn't really work in the real world of a Tuesday evening. But maybe just even asking somebody, how are you? Or you look good. Or reminding them, saying something nice. Because that might be the difference between their good day and bad day. And as we know, all it takes is one really bad day for somebody to make a really, really long-term decision that may not necessarily have to be made at all. So that's what empathy is for me. It's about understanding.
That's really well put, Martin, and thank you so much for sharing that anecdote and story with us as well, because I know that lots of people, I've seen comments come in there just commenting again on how powerful that article was. And if you're someone tuning in that hasn't actually read that article, I recommend you do. It's an incredible really heartfelt piece, and I think it's interesting that for you that moment of empathy stemmed from grief, and I know it's different for so many people, and everybody will have their own experience with maybe discovering empathy and its value in their lives. Mamobo, can you remember a moment in your life where you really felt that empathy was a game changer?
So I remember recounting the story with you earlier today, Louise, around the time when I kind of just like checked myself, to be honest, regarding the experiences that I have and relating that to the communities that I work with. So one time that I found that empathy was a game changer in my life was when I was roughly 18 years old. I was in my second year of college, and my background is in social psychology, and I was in the psychology department in UL. And I was volunteering with, at that time it was the Syrian conflict, and a lot of Syrian migrants came into Limerick in Ireland, and we were working with psychosocial supports and integration for the migrant communities. So me, having come from a migrant background myself, my parents are Nigerian, and I'm Nigerian myself, and I thought that I would empathize with these individuals because I come from a migrant background myself. And I was there on my high horse saying, no, you can't treat them this way, you can't do them this way, you can't do them that way. And then it was an event that happened in which the Syrian refugees, or the people with that refugee experiences, they were telling their stories. The adults were telling their stories as to how they came to Ireland, the conflict that was happening in Syria at the time. It actually wasn't the adults, it was the children that was translating for the adults. But they were telling their stories as to their experiences in Ireland as at that time, when was this, 2016, 2017. And it was at that moment where I was like, okay, you actually don't know anything regarding this particular migrant experience. And it was at that time where I could actually actively listen and hear their stories, and actually empathize in a way that was not linked to my own story, but actually empathizing in a way that is linked to their own story and hearing from their experiences and supporting them moving forward. So it was at that moment that it switched from, let's say, sympathizing with these communities and then empathizing. So the difference for me, sympathizing is more of like pity, I would say, for lack of a better term. And then empathizing is actually sitting with somebody, hearing their story and building compassion. For me, compassion is empathy plus action. And that's how you can unite across the differences that we have in terms of experience, in terms of knowledge, in terms of identities as well. So I always say any talk that I go to that like I'm on a personal mission to unify the world, and it actually starts with empathy building as well. And that's why I think this conversation and this initiative is a really essential when it comes to unifying across differences, hearing stories, building compassion, building unity, building empathy is really essential when we can actually unify across those differences in order to break down those barriers, divisions, racism, beliefs, etc. So that's probably one of the experiences that I had in terms of me noticing empathy as a game changer in my life.
That was so well put, Mamobo, and I love your idea of unifying the world. I think if there's one woman to do it anyway, you're the right woman to lead the charge. So bring us along with you, and it's inspirational to hear that. And I think to know that you don't always have to, sometimes we think we're being empathetic, but it's fine to stop yourself and say, actually, no, maybe I'm being sympathetic, not empathetic. How can I improve the way I'm being? And to pull yourself up in that moment and educate yourself a little more. Colm, I'd love to come to yourself. You're coming from a music background, a creative background. We spoke earlier as well about maybe the sensitive side of being a performer, a musician working in a creative industry. Do you think that has its own unique links to empathy and being an empathetic person?
Yeah, to bring it back to Gil, if you're talking about personal experiences, I mean, the memory that sprung to mind there for me was back in 1987 playing at my grandfather's funeral. And I was, playing an air to Aidan Ní Nósfinn Céhí for Ireland. I wouldn't speak her name, and learning the tune beforehand, and having that sense of responsibility and having to play, and just afterwards, and playing in this big church and beautiful high ceilings and wonderful acoustics, and the fiddle has never sounded as sweet, and just it was something that happened at that moment where the amount of people who approached me afterwards, who just were moved, and so, and thankfully and unfortunately I've played at many funerals since, but the same, and and I kind of see it as an enormous privilege to be able to kind of hold that door open for the music to come in. In a way, it's kind of, the musician can sometimes kind of ground the lightning, and so it's an enormous responsibility and a privilege. And I suppose as an artist, as a creative person who, as all of you are creative, will appreciate, kind of grounding the static is a challenge. And for me, I think empathy begins at home. So empathy and begins in ourselves. So I think it's all about it. The journey begins with kind of having to figure out your own. I mean, I think every artist, I think, has a personal journey where they have to kind of excavate their own basements and go on their own journey and face their own dragons and shadows. And I think through that process, when you get to the good stuff, it's through realizing kindness to self. And I think once you've actually got to that point, I think that's the it's the beautiful thing that empathy brings. Unexpected empathy brings you to a point where you appreciate other people. So it's kind of like it's a wonderful kind of positive loop that happens between realizing it breaks down all distance between people, regardless of where they're from or how they speak or what language they speak. It's all about, and I suppose music has that as well, where it's kind of, it just connects hearts. So it's a kind of a direct form of communication. So having spent a lifetime in that, it's yeah, it's lovely to be able to share that.
That's beautiful, Colm. And I love that idea of unexpected empathy as well, because I think that maybe sometimes we don't see the empathy that is around us. That's beautiful as well that you share that anecdote about your grandfather's funeral. So thank you for that. I guess we'll work our way back around the panel again. And what I'd like to ask you in relation to all of your respective backgrounds and your life experience to date, when you reflect on maybe the life you've led and you think about empathy and you think about young people or people who are on this call this evening with the hope to, you know, spread the message and hopefully promote empathetic living, what is the one thing that you think individually needs to significantly change in Ireland in order for us to become a more empathetic nation or a more empathetic community or a place to live and to be? Martin, can I start with asking you that question?
I just think, you know, connecting with people, allowing yourself, I think actually, if I was to give any advice, it would be to never fear showing your vulnerability, actually. And that's something that, you know, it took me a long time to, I suppose, allow myself to even indulge in that thought, because when you're in society, you have to put up these boundaries, otherwise you leave yourself vulnerable to just nasty people in general. But I think the strength that comes from allowing yourself in a controlled way to show your vulnerabilities, to show the things that, you know, have hurt you, or the things that, you know, get you down, or the things that make you angry, or the things that make you sad or whatever, to show those, because it allows other people to know that it's normal, actually. It destigmatizes it. And we see the fallout of not being able to speak openly about things that are stigmatized, as in poorer mental health, you know. And it's only recently, the last while, that people are just not caring anymore about the negative people online or what they have to say, because they know that, yeah, okay, I might deal with 5 really negative, horrible people online, which I dealt with actually just after that article. I had people saying, I wouldn't read this because I despise these people. I hope they all kill themselves to be doing us all a favor, you know. So, but I do it, and other people do it. You take that hit and you sacrifice a few minutes of your life from, you know, taking time to block those people, but it might help 100 people who read it. It might help that one person in the west of Ireland or out in the Aran Islands who may not have a support group around them. There may be an LGBT person, it may be an elderly LGBT person in the West End of Mayo who don't have access to anybody else and don't know how to express what they're feeling. So I think if you want to really bring empathy across the country, we need to start by showing it ourselves. Every single time you display empathy towards somebody else, it is infectious, just like you said at the start. It is infectious. If somebody does something nice for you, it's like that whole pay it forward thing. But do that with your time and with your love and compassion, and be human. Bring the humanity back into it. I think social media and technology is great. It has connected the world in ways we've never even imagined. But I do think that the sacrifice for that is we become more disconnected with who we are, our individuality, our emotions, our true emotions, not the emotions that we portray on Instagram in a lovely selfie, our true emotions. It's dehumanized us in that way. It's taken away our emotions. And we need to start showing that more often and displaying it. We also need to start receiving it. So if somebody's having a bad day, give them a hug. It won't kill you, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
can I ask you a personal question? Do you think that empathy is acknowledged within the traveller community?
that's a good question. And I think, like most of Ireland, the first thing you need to do is ask, do people understand what the word empathy means? In actual fact, if you were to ask the vast majority of people, they probably wouldn't understand what empathy is. They all understand sympathy, but empathy, no, not many people understand it. I do think, though, that if you described what empathy was, a lot of people would. And I do think that the traveling community do have quite a lot of empathy. They have to, because it's not about sympathy for their cousin or their neighbor. When we talk about our suicide, it's not, oh, I feel sorry for you. No, it's not. I feel what you're feeling because I'm probably related to that person, or I've had one of my own suicides in my family, or I'm feeling suicidal myself. So I don't think it's a great example to use a more, I suppose, internalized community, a more marginalized community, because we tend to feel each other's pain a lot more than the vast majority or the majority in society. That just tends to be the case. And mainly the reason why is because when hate is lumped upon us, it's lumped on all of us. So we've learned to have that connectivity when it comes to our emotions, I suppose. But I think that the vast majority of Irish people have more than the capability, and definitely a lot of them have. We are the most charitable, let's not sell ourselves short here, okay? We are the most charitable country in the world. Per capita, we are the most charitable country. So we do have it within us. We all do.
I think you're so right, and thanks, Martin, for that honesty. I know that was probably just a question I felt that was to be asked, but also I think, like Colm said a little earlier, empathy knows no boundaries, the same as music. It's a universal language to be empathetic. So it shouldn't, there's no differences as to what community you speak about when we talk about empathy.
Word, I think it just you were 100% right, and your question was brilliant, and I'm glad you asked it. But I think the issue is not about, do any group in society know what empathy is? It's just a word. Not many people get to the word.
Exactly. That's so, yeah, thanks for saying that. You're dead right. Absolutely. Mamobo, can I ask you that question about a significant change that you would like to see in terms of empathy in Ireland? Is there anything that you feel really needs to change in order to make our society a more empathetic place?
Yeah, so just coming off the back of what Martin said, as people are becoming, as we want people to become more vulnerable, on the opposite side of that, one thing I would really like the world to know, or people to see, is that we want people to not only hear, but listen, and listen to understand, rather to retaliate, rather to bring about conflict, rather to debate. It's about creating this idea of dialogue. And that's how you can actually empathize, when you hear people's stories. So sometimes when somebody is being vulnerable and trying to open up to you in terms of their story, in terms of their background, in terms of an experience that they had, empathy is not going to be built if the other person is like in a different world, or if the other person is not even listening, but just hearing it. It's going in one ear and out the other. But empathy is built when that person actually absorbs all the words that that person is saying, asking open questions and listening to actually understand that human experience that they're having, rather than retaliate, rebel, and things like that. So because, like Martin was talking about, the online world that we have, a lot of people, they're just there to spew out their own opinion and spew out their agenda or whatever, rather than absorb what other people are saying in order to listen and empathize with them. So I would say that's something that's really necessary in the world, or in Ireland as well, is to really listen, to absorb that person, the other person's experiences, the other person's values, the other person's beliefs, even though you don't believe in the person, in what the other person is saying, or you don't believe in their belief system, whether it may be religion or whatever. You want to listen to actually be like, okay, I hear you. I see where you're coming from. It may not be my own experience, my own whatever, but I hear you and I respect that human experience. And I see one comment that Shane made in terms of empathy is choosing to see ourselves in another despite our differences. I would argue considering our differences rather than despite them. So we live in a very diverse world where each and every one of us are different. And each and every one of us has different human experiences, and this can lead us into living in different social groups, different communities, different everything like that. But something is oftentimes, when we try to build an empathetic world, we want to say, oh, we forget the differences that we have in society, but that can actually build more division than anything. So we want to build, me personally, it's in terms of building a world where we actually highlight, see those differences, experiences, by sharing stories, by sharing experiences, by sharing the human identities that we have, but actually within those different experiences, different stories, hearing and listening, actually seeing the similarities that we have as well, by coming together, by listening, by actively listening, and by creating that dialogue. So just, yeah, like I was saying on the back of what Martin was saying, when you're sharing your vulnerability, on the other side of it, what we really need to see in society is actually actively listening, and actually listening to understand rather than retaliate.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So powerfully said, and so inspirational, Mamobo, as well. I think everyone will agree. There's tons of questions coming in, and please, if you're tuning in now, feel free to add your question. We will do our best to get around to them. Mamobo, I have a beautiful question for you that I will come back to in just a few. But Colm, I would just like to ask you if you'd like to add to anything Martin and Mamobo have said there in terms of seeing change or a significant difference that maybe we can aim or work towards as a society.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we live in a uniquely toxic kind of state and culture that's we're all bound up in it on a global level, which is obviously very it's accelerating things along at a great speed. But it's important to acknowledge all of us individually come from ancestral communities, strong, vibrant cultures, and all of these cultures have been atomized and smashed. And so the most basic thing in the world, it's like the Gabor Mate thing, that's the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And I think there's a yearning in everybody for connection and for that sense of community. I'm reminded on something that we could change our view on, and on a day-to-day level. I remember a striking post online a couple of years ago was somebody talking, because obviously the social media and news is all about the bad news generally, but somebody pointed out that whenever any sort of like tragedy or war or whatever was happening, being broadcast on TV, that their mother would always, instead of concentrating as the newscasters were on the explosion perpetrators, bombs droppers, instead look at the people who are helping. Look at the people. The human nature is the people who run to the site of carnage and dig people out of the rubble. And that's who we are, rather than the very small percentage who cause the chaos. So I think it's really important to kind of switch it around in that.
Yeah. And I think on that as well, Colm, mainstream media and the fact now, particularly post-pandemic times, we've spent nearly 2 years living in a viral reality and doing everything online. We consume so much. Do you think we've lost sight a little bit of the real life?
Yeah, I think we're kind of, we've been in a submarine for 2 years, and I think we're all surfacing and with a bit of the bends, and so I think it's especially in cities, perhaps it's more pronounced. But I don't know. I mean, once people get together, things can heal very quickly, and nature can heal very quickly once it's given a chance to recover. I suppose it's just it's connection, it's community, it's calling your friends who you haven't seen in a while and having a night out and having the crack, and it's all there. I just think everybody has a sense of kind of having been missing a limb, for the past kind of couple of years. So everybody's walking with a limp at the moment.
Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, it comes full circle, Martin, to everything you said about just simply smiling at someone, giving someone a hug, things that we were nearly told were illegal to do during the pandemic. Our faces were physically covered, hugging wasn't allowed. It's coming back around, isn't it, to those very simple acts, and just almost letting somebody know that, you are an approachable person and that you're there to actively listen and to be a listening ear or an empathetic voice to someone who needs it.
So me.
Well, I'm just saying you're the king of the hugs. So come back around, that idea of hugging, I feel it's a funny thing to suggest for people to do, because do you reckon post-pandemic times we're like, hug someone, not a hope?
But isn't Isn't there that thing about oxytocin being released or some
Yes.
chemical or something like that?
Serotonin, is it? Is that happiness? I'm not sure.
Happiness is waking up in Galway a week, okay?
Is it?
But there's something in a hug, and there's something about allowing another person that close to you, and your beating hearts kind of that close together, and you're holding them because you're each holding them close, or the other person close, and you're almost protecting them, and you're looking over their shoulder for them. There's something about a hug that's reciprocal. It's about safety, it's about love, but it's like Colm said, there's connectivity in that. And I do believe that we've lost a little bit of that. And somebody mentioned in the comments a really good point about the pandemic. I do think that the pandemic did something to us. And I think in the next number of years, we're going to see the psychological fallout from that, actually. There's no way that you get a society that has spent 2 years saying goodbye to their elders through a glass window where they couldn't hold their hands of their dying family member. There's no way that doesn't transfer into intergenerational trauma. There's no way that just gets forgotten in the past. So no, I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I actually fear for the youth who have spent 2 years, and I know a lot of people were laughing at it. Oh, the youth are crying, they lost 2 years of their lives. Should they have the rest of their lives? Those 2 years could be the two most important years of their lives. Yeah. And if within that 2 years, you've lost a family member, an elder, and you didn't get to spend time with them when they were saying goodbye, that doesn't leave you. There's guilt, there's regret, there's bereavement, there's a delayed bereavement, there's unanswered questions. That doesn't leave you. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. This is why empathy is important.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
but other people lost family members.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right, Martin. And again, #empathy is a game changer. So please feel free to tag and share your experiences with us. It's fantastic to listen to all of your stories. And I know we could chat for the entire night and you've so much more to say. I'm just conscious of some of these fantastic questions that have been coming in. And I really do want to make sure that people's voices are heard and you get a chance to answer these. Mamobo, I'm going to start with yourself. And I've got to ask this question. This comes in from the CEO of Narrative 4 Global, if you don't mind now. So it's a very important question. The question is, if Mamobo was stranded on a desert island for a week, whom would she want to be with? I guess, and I'm wondering who her heroes are. Are they living or dead? That's a tough question to put you on the spot, but clearly you're inspiring the global audience tonight, Mamobo.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. I think, so do I have to just pick one person?
Well, heroes is in plural. If you've got a few, go for it.
So for me, I'm a very family-oriented person. So the first person that popped up in my head was probably my sister or my mom. Those are the first two people. I would consider them my heroes because they're my confidants. They're the people I go to when I'm having a stressful time or when everything's going all over the place. So I would want to be, I don't know, now deserted island, I don't know, but still, they're the first people that pop in my head. But then in terms of some other inspirational people that, this is a tough question. Some other inspirational people that I would think of and have probably conversations if there were resources on the island. I would love to have a conversation with Nelson Mandela in terms of just his whole life experience. I know he's dead, but that was part of the question. But Nelson Mandela in terms of the life experience that he had, in terms of his activism, and in terms of how he actually turned over an entire nation and grappled the entire world with the words and his action and his compassion that he had for South Africa in the apartheid era. So that's actually just an inspirational person. But then personally to myself, my parents and my mom and my sister.
That's beautiful. That's so lovely. And do you know what? I think this question is kind of like one of those situations. Who would you bring to a dinner party? So maybe we won't just banish you to the desert island just yet. Another lovely question here that's coming into the panel, and maybe Colm, you might take this one. It is from Niamh Bohan, and she's asking the panel to reflect on the importance of self-care and being able to live empathetically in the world. I think for you, Colm, you're in an industry where you perform, you entertain others. Your job is to make others happy. How do you practice self-care?
It's a life's work, really. I mean, obviously the most obvious thing as a young musician is that you are working in other people's recreation time. So that can have lots of unexpected and unanticipated, messiness that can happen. But having done it for a couple of decades, it's really tricky. It's the best of times. It was the worst of times. So it's a matter of like the whole. I think the centering your artistic practice. These sound very highfalutin. And it's only kind of in my fifth decade that I can kind of confidently say my artistic practice, and I encourage all teenagers with an artistic practice to start talking about it. So it really it's just so important to value your intuition and value your own uniqueness, your own unique frequency, musical or color choice in whatever you draw or whatever you write. Your unique choice of words, your way of putting them together is something that's so unique to you. So it's where we can be so distracted in this world of like by 1,000 other things, or by how better other people are doing or seemingly doing, that it's just really important to bring it all back to your own stuff, and to and that's where the kind of kindness to self thing is so important, because once you start being kind to yourself, you start valuing yourself, and learning to say no as well. That's really important.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly difficult thing for people working in creative industries to practice, that idea of saying no, when it can be often the case that work is so sporadic. Can I just come back quickly to that idea there of being kind to yourself and not comparing yourself to others? Because I think that a big thing about being empathetic to yourself is that idea of not letting comparison steal your joy. And I think we live in this social media world where we can't help but compare ourselves on a daily basis, and it's almost Instagram versus reality, that idea of us comparing ourselves to these lives that we know absolutely nothing about. I mean, for a musician, I'd imagine that's something that's nearly impossible to avoid.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think I think it's just really important to practice being joyful for other people's achievements as an experiment. To actively kind of say well done, or to celebrate other people's achievements is such a powerful thing, I think. And that's just so, because what you're actually telling the world is that you're not coveting it. You're not envious. Envy is a very destructive and toxic sort of thing that can go to work quietly and turn lovely people into bitter shells. And it's such a detergent to creative oils. You know what I mean? So that's is a really great practical thing to do, is to enjoy and celebrate other people's work and achievements.
Yeah, really well said. And I think it's that idea of sour grapes, isn't it, that you might have if projecting something that you feel an insecurity of your own.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, thank you as well, Colm. I know that these questions are still coming in, so I'm just getting through them on my phone here. But Martin, would you like to add anything there in terms of self-care as a creative? Do you have any practices that you could share with our viewers tonight, something that you practice that maybe helps you be more empathetic towards yourself and others? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Martin. It's like the quote of the last 2 years, isn't it?
And that was such an insightful thing. I have to forget.
Oh. I hope it was.
What I was saying was that's actually a work in progress with me at the moment, and it's okay that it's a work in progress. It's okay that if you're not quite getting there, it's self-care. I think as a creative, our minds are constantly in flux, and I actually think that I owe a lot of my best stuff to my lower moments. And it's about allowing those lower moments to be expressed creatively, actually. It's about taking, like when I do stand-up comedy, I suffer from generalized anxiety anyway, not all the time, but at certain points, something might trigger it. I have learned to not harness it, because that sounds like it's a superpower, but I allow it to take control. So when you're about to do a gig, in Colm, you probably know this, and Mamobo, you probably know this also, it's anticipatory anxiety that ends as soon as you pick up the microphone, or as soon as you say your first word. It's just anticipatory. So you're anxious up until the point that you're in the moment of the things you're anxious about. What I've learned to do is allow my own anxiety to build up to a point that when I pick up the microphone, that, along with the anticipatory anxiety, is released. So my bit of advice for self-care is to get writing, get performing, get expressing. Whatever way you find fit, express yourself, allow it out. And you never know. There might be a really good play, song, story in that. Allow it to flow through you. And listen to your emotions. Listen to the low moments. They're telling you something. That's self-care. Listen to them. Just don't listen to the negative things that's, telling you that you're useless or you're bad or whatever. But listen to the things that are triggering them. Listen to the things that need a bit of care and allow it to be expressed.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think, Martin, everyone tuning in is just going to want to hang out with you. All of the positive vibes, all of the hugs, feel good music, and you'll
really
just
bad jokes.
No, that's incredible, and thank you, because I think that was really, really well said. A slightly longer question here, Mamobo, but I'm going to ask you on this one because I know this is a particular area of interest for you. This one comes in from Seamus, and he said that he's read the Narrative Forum Mantra strategy and the Red C poll results, and it said that women are likelier to say online bullying impacts youth mental health. Women aged 35 to 54 are significantly more likely than men of the same age to say that online bullying is impacting youth's mental health. Younger women are most likely to think Ireland is divisive, while young men are the least. So I guess it's your opinion on gender differences or dynamics that are involved here, Mamobo.
Yeah, so I would say that gender differences are a thing, and it's something that we really need to highlight, both particularly for young people and with mental health as well. Like you were saying earlier, Louise, that we were living in sort of like an online space for the past 2 years. And in that space, a lot of more people got online. And online is a space where we have the Instagrams, we have the TikToks, we have the Facebooks, whatever. That's a space where people share who they are and share and everything like that. And for a lot of young women, that's a space where they share their looks, they share their fashion, they share everything like that. And with that, a lot of young women, they place their mental health a lot of the time with how they look, with how people see them. And again, that leads to what? Comparison. That leads to not feeling good about yourself if you're seeing the highlight reel of somebody else's life. So a lot of times women can actually feel the sort of negative outcomes of living in this online world based on what they're seeing other people do, or other women, I don't know, using Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. So it's really essential that, sorry, Siri is just listening to me and it's
repeating.
It's repeating everything I'm doing. But it's really essential that that we kind of look at how particularly young women are experiencing this online world, because young women are often raised, it's another global issue, but young women are often raised to actually value their looks, value how they present themselves, value the physical attributes rather than what's up here, than anything else. So because we're living in this online space where a lot of people are actually seeing the pictures, seeing the videos, seeing everything, this can actually lead to poorer mental health for young women who actually attribute their self-worth sometimes and their confidence to those areas as well. So it's really essential that in order to break down these barriers, like what Martin was saying, that we show the vulnerable side, we show the ugly sides, we show the actual real humanity. You're not always going to be pretty or beautiful every single day for young women to actually see that this may actually be this is not always the reality that we're living in society now. So I don't know if that answered your question to some extent, but it's just this idea of understanding that there are actually gender differences when it comes to comparison, when it comes to living in online spaces, when it comes to actually engaging in the world that we live in today.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think that does, Mamobo. And I think as well, maybe a word as well about being kinder to one another online. And I know that's such an overused, I think, statement sometimes on social media. We see hashtag be kind, and we wonder if the people hashtagging be kind are also the trolls that are behind other accounts. So do you think that there's a way that we can actually practice empathy on social media as young women, particularly, or towards other young women? And sorry if that's a gender specific question.
Yeah, so I think like it's really easy not to say something. Like online, we always kind of complain. It's a great place to just get the complaining, to tweet about when you're angry. It's really easy to say the negative. But particularly when we actually want to create an empathetic online world, it's important to actually say the positive. If someone's having said something or announced something or something good happening in their life, it's really easy to ignore it, but actually comment and say, well done. It actually may actually make or break that person's day. Engage in the positive that's happening in online spaces. What social media is, it's an online platform where we actually share. So what the algorithms and everything they want engagement. So if we actually engage with the positive, if we actually engage with the kindness, if we actually engage with the good stories, the humanity-based stories, that's actually going to amplify and boost it for other people to see the good that's happening in society. Oftentimes in media, we see the negative all the time, and that actually overshadows the majority of good that's happening in society. So in order to make a more empathetic, a kinder, more open online space for both men and women, it's important that we actually engage socially with the good that's happening in society. So this can be a tweet, this can be a comment, this can be sharing something. Social media wants engagement, and that's how we can actually create a more positive social media environment.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Engage with the good. It's a lovely thought. I want to ask this question, and I guess just because I'm conscious of time, bring it back to school, bring it back to the classroom for the teachers tuning in, students and parents. And this question comes in from the brilliant Lisa Nicole Dunn from Mantra Strategy. And it's important that I say Lisa Nicole and Mantra have been hugely involved in this event for Empathy is a Game Changer. So this is a fantastic question that maybe if I throw it out there, you can decide if someone feels passionate about answering it, and we might get a quick answer from all of you on it. So the question is, what would the panel say to someone who feels discriminated against or totally isolated right now in school? How can they stay open in the face of this? And if empathy is not forthcoming for them right now, can they suggest empathy training to a teacher, or perhaps what else could they do to stay positive and to forge those connections for themselves?
Is this for the student or?
So I guess the student, let's say the student first. If it's a student who feels isolated, discriminated, and it doesn't know where to turn, and maybe not, because I think school, it is that position of the teacher has the authority and the power. Can I tell my teacher he or she needs empathy training? You know, where does the student start in that situation?
This is actually, sorry if I jump in, but this is actually something that's very personal to me as well, because we didn't have any of this when I was in secondary school, and I actually moved school because of race-based bullying by both the students and staff at the time. So I was that student that felt discriminated, and I just didn't know where to turn. So my situation was that I actually just lied to my mom, and I told her that, oh, I just want to change school because the other school has better facilities. You probably saw under all of that. And we actually effectively just changed into a different school. But I would say to the student themselves, understand that what your experience is not your fault. You have no control of the situation, and that better days are going to come from all of that. I would say that talk to someone. I actually just talked to my friends. My friends were really good at that time. Talk to someone that you can actually trust. It may not be someone that has authority or power, but just talking and telling your story helps with the anxiety, helps with the stress. And then it's better, obviously, to talk to someone that has authority, power. Then you can talk to a parent, talk to someone that actually gets your experience, which is usually someone from your own social group. And then they can actually help you to create a change, or change school, or teach teachers, or do whatever you need to do to get you out of that situation. But I would say that actually just telling someone that you trust is the first step to actually moving past whether you feel discriminated, whether you're being bullied, whether there's homophobia in your school. Just talk to someone and use that voice that you have, because your voice shouldn't be silenced in a situation like that.
Great advice. Thanks, Mamobo. Martin, can I ask you, for someone who feels marginalized and is talking out but isn't being listened to, what would you advise that person to do? Don't forget to unmute us. We need your voice, the irony.
I'm sorry, I'm rehearsing since 8 o'clock this morning and I'm very tired, so I do apologize. Okay, you're asking me what would I tell somebody who's feeling discriminated against?
But maybe also voiceless, that is, maybe express themselves to authority, to figures of authority within their school, but isn't seeing change or isn't,
Very simple, very simple. The day of asking people to change their crappy behavior is finished. If you're a young person in school, the schools aren't doing anything to change it, you're being made feel vulnerable in a horrible situation. If you're being discriminated against and the school isn't listening, go to social media. You will very quickly find a community who'll get behind you, and that'll force the school to change their behavior. It's as simple as that. Because I'm sick of young kids and teenagers feeling as though they're powerless against the system. Those days are gone. We're mobilized now. You have friends, they may not be in your school, but we have people out there. There's a huge community of people who will not stand by and allow that to happen. Don't feel as though you can't voice it. And the reason why this continues to go on is because people feel powerless. They feel as though they're in it on their own. You're not. That's my advice to the student. If there's a teacher, because teachers can also suffer from policies within schools, especially if they're not in senior positions. If it's the exact same way, ask yourself this question. If the policies are being detrimental to the mental health or the physical health of one of your students and the school is doing nothing to change it, is that a school you want to protect? You're there to make sure that the education is for the kids, and you're also there to make sure that those kids are safe while they're getting that education. The onus is on you to make sure if you spot something up like that, face it, challenge it. Obviously go to the school first. Thankfully, I think schools are really getting behind things these days, but it does still happen. So my advice would definitely go to that student, because I was that student. And I guarantee you don't allow anyone, especially some of the old school policies that are still in place in a lot of schools, don't allow segregation to happen. Don't allow the teacher to put all of your group, as in travelers, all at one table at the front of the class so they can keep an eye on you. Don't put up with it. You've just as much right as every other student in that class. If the school want to prolong that kind of discrimination and segregation, call them out, go to social media. We're waiting. That's my advice.
Well said, Martin, and clearly your passion is infectious, so thank you for that. Colm, can I leave a parting word with you? Would you add to anything that Mamobo or Martin has just said?
No, just other well said. Here. I think what we want is to find our tribe. I think that's and the sooner we can get there, the simpler and the happier everything gets. So find tune in your groove, whatever it is that that it may be the thing that it's invariably the thing that makes you stand out or that's unusual in your group. And in this world of social media, find others like you and live happily ever after.
Well said. Well, look, we'll not ask you to leave us with a song. Don't worry, I wouldn't put you on the spot like that. Tune in your groove. I've never heard that phrase, but you're dead right. Find your tribe, be an active listener, help to unify the people around you, and don't forget to give the odd hug here and there as well. It's been an absolute honour to chat with all three of you, Colm Mac Con Iomaire, Mamobo Ogoro and Martin Warde as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to invite James Lawler of Narrative 4 to join our screen right now. James has lots of details about upcoming events within Narrative 4 and important information that you need to know if you're tuning in and you want to find out more as well. And just on my behalf as well, I'd love to thank Rory on tech, who's helped all of tonight come across as seamless as it has in terms of tech, and for James as well, and to Lisa Nicole for asking me to be the host. I really feel so motivated and inspired after speaking to this incredible panel. So thank you so much, everybody. James, over to your good self.
And thank you, Louise, and thank you to our amazing panelists. I think this was kind of designed to be the start of a conversation, and this series, Empathy is a Game Changer, will continue on. And I suppose it's about capturing the work that we do in schools and bringing it out into the society and saying, like, how can we embed an empathic practice in how our society progresses and how we treat each other in our schools, in our communities. And a lot of our work in Narrative for Ireland, you know, we train teachers, we train youth workers, and those facilitators go off and do amazing work. This, like the story exchange, has traveled into Mountjoy prison. It has traveled into like youth centres. It has traveled into like with older people and younger people, like creating community. And it's all, this work is all about creating community, creating connection, and I suppose celebrating people and celebrating connection. And we lost so much of that over the last 2 years. And I think this conversation was really important tonight. And I just want to thank the panelists again. I want to thank some of the funders, Rethink Ireland, who funded this today, and the Department of Rural and Community Development, who are one of our funders as well, and has funded this initiative. If you want to find out more, you can go on to narrative4.ie. There's dates up there for the trainings. You can also, if you want to like learn a bit about some of the work that we do in schools, we've created a new training just for the general public. It takes 15 minutes and you get a certificate. So we have lots of managers doing this, lots of people from the business world, etc., doing it, and just from the general public, and get a sense of some of the activities such as listening skills that we kind of embed in this work. But I just want to say thank you again for everyone that has joined tonight, and I hope that we will do this again in the near future.
Brilliant.
Well,
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, James. I guess we just need to remind people that hashtag empathy is a game changer is still live. Please go and tag at Narrative for Ireland on Instagram, on Twitter. Let us know if you tuned in tonight. We would love to hear from you all. And yeah, Gura Mila Mahagoiv, and thank you so much for being part of a great chat. Agus Sinead Stoilam.